My interest in the ocean was sparked early on by the undersea world of Jacques Cousteau, which aired on television in the 60s, and no one had ever seen anything like that, I think, before he had started doing those specials, and it was just like landing on the moon for me. So after college, I got a job at what was called the Orange County Marine Institute, and now is known as the Ocean Institute in Dana Point, California. Harry Helling, the director, asked me to do a comic book about tide pool ecology. And so I came up with this idea of doing this comic book called The Intertidal Zone. And it starred basically all these invertebrate sea creatures from the tide pools in Southern California, such as sea star, barnacles, shore crabs. And actually the host was a sponge named Bob, but not like SpongeBob. He was a natural-looking sponge. I reached a point at the Marine Institute where I was more interested in creating things and painting and sculpting. I started using motors and parts from old toys and sort of cannibalized these things into sculptures. I have one right here. This one is this dog that I made out of some motor from some toy. He actually barks a little bit. He's a little bit old right now, so he's sounding tired. I actually went up to CalArts and brought all my paintings with me. I had no animation experience and no films. And I met with Jules Engel, who was the head of the experimental animation program there. And he looked at my work and said, "You belong here," immediately. And it totally changed my life. My thesis film was called Wormholes, and that was funded by the Princess Grace Foundation. Wormholes was an attempt to depict relativity in a poetic way. I was trying to present this kind of complex scientific idea in a way that was easy to understand.
I had a film accepted into the Ottawa Animation Festival. So I went to a screening of Wormholes, and I love the style, but it was extremely cerebral and conceptual and warped.
Joe Murray, who's trying to put together the show Rocko's Modern Life, was looking for directors, which was a dream job for anybody that likes animation.
We worked from outlines. Rocco was storyboard driven, which is another thing that appealed to Steve.
That style of writing was the way many of the earlier Warner Brothers cartoons were written, and many others, probably Fleischer, these things where they didn't follow a script.
There was one in particular that had a story of, it was undersea, actually, episode where fish are fishing for fishermen, and he came up with that.
Working on the last season, I remember I was talking with writer Martin Olson about shows and funny animal shows, and I really thought I don't really have an idea that I'd want to torture myself over for several seasons. And then Martin was looking at the Intertidal comic that I had, and he said, "What, are you crazy? This is your show right here." So I thought I'd like to do a show about an innocent, sort of like a Jerry Lewis Under the Sea kind of thing. I started to think, well, what undersea creature would represent this? And so I just started drawing undersea animals, and I came across the sponge. It was really not very animated. They usually sit pretty quiet on rocks, filter feeding. But it still seemed like a funny shape, so I started drawing these sponges, and then it dawned on me that there was a sink sponge, so I drew a square one, and I immediately locked on to the idea of this undersea nerd. And from that point on, I thought, well, that's the star, SpongeBob. Two very important people in the genesis of the show SpongeBob were Derek Drymon and Nick Jennings, who were companions from Rocko.
He was, at the time, the creative director of the show. And so that's the first time we got to write together and work together.
Steve called me up and said that he was putting this pitch together and he needed a little bit of a couple of paintings to sort of lock in visually what's going on for the background style.
I actually hired those guys to come over to my house and help me develop this pitch Bible, which is what most people, when they pitch an animated show, they come up with some kind of information about the design and the concept and story ideas. And so Derek and Nick came over, and I would basically work with Derek on the concepts, and then Nick on the other side was working on the art for the pitch Bible.
I paint much tighter, render a lot more. Then we ended up stylizing SpongeBob. And Steve's paintings were exactly the opposite. They were super loose, super rough, and really fun to look at and really colorful. It took a while for me to sort of get into that sort of idea of keeping looser and, getting as loose as possible. We couldn't just translate his style of painting right into animation. It was just a little too loose.
I try not to walk in with an idea of my own to inject into, try to force Steve into doing something. I try to wait and see what he's thinking, and then I can react to that.
Ultimately, the day came when we had I had this pitch Bible. I had all the characters at least thought out and some storylines, and it was time to pitch the show.
And he had on his Hawaiian shirt. He had this whole underwater terrarium with little models of the characters. He had artwork. He had Hawaiian music playing.
Also had recorded a version of the theme song just with me singing into a tape recorder, and I implanted it into the shell so that when you lift it up, it plays the theme song.
It was pretty amazing. I'd say one of the cardinal rules when you're pitching is to just get people in the room to laugh, get their attention, get them excited.
I guess I was just trying to do anything to make them think this is weird and let's take another meeting.
I think one of the most amazing things about his initial pitch, after all of the funny stuff, he had character descriptions and an overview of the world that it was so complete. He knew who his characters were. It was amazing. And if you look back now, these years later, it's all there in the original documents.
I loved the idea that he was a marine biologist in a former life, that he studied marine biology. That was a big thing because it was like, well, who's going to know this world better than somebody that's actually interested in this world?
I was like, let's just do it. I don't know what this sponge is, but let's do it.
They decided to give us money to write a storyboard, and let's see what happens with this.
So we had 2 weeks to write the pilot episode.
And I came into the room, and there up on the wall was these extraordinary storyboards everywhere. And Steve and his team were there, and they put on a performance which I wish I had on tape.
He started to pitch the show, and it was like, oh my God, this guy is good. He is funny. He was doing all the voices. He was doing the sound effects.
They were laughing. Went really well. And so it was stressful because we knew that was the decision.
He acted out every character. He made voices, and the other people came in and chimed in with their voices, and he pointed to the boards, and the kineticism of the boards itself, even in the action sequences where he goes, it bounces off here and off here and off here and bounces there, and he goes here and he goes there and he slaps there, and every sound, you could almost hear every sound effect.
So me and Steve and Nick were waiting in the room, and they just walked out, and it was like 5 minutes, and we were worried. We thought it would take weeks.
The only reason after the pilot pitch that we took a few minutes to step outside is that we were exhausted from laughing, and we really just had to calm down and figure out the right way to just tell him to go ahead, because we wanted to have some modicum of control of the process.
Door opened and Albie walked in. He's like, "Okay, it was great. Let's do it."
So after we finished the pilot, they aired it to several people, and Nickelodeon and test groups. So we got a green light to do 13 episodes. That's when the real work began, and that is to find a team to make this show. We put together slowly what I think was an incredible team. A lot of them were really young and new to this type of writing, and had great, fresh ideas. And so I attribute much of the success to SpongeBob to that collaboration.